We're back, and joining us at the table, Washington Post opinion writer Jonathan Capehart and Emily Jane Fox, senior reporter for Vanity Fair. Lucky for us, both MSNBC contributors. And you're on the Cohen beat. I mean, I Google you and see what there is to know. How's he doing?
I think that this has been a tough week after the Fox and Friends interview last week. He's been spending 10-plus hours a day with his lawyers. The government has started to return some of the items that they seized from his office and his hotel. And so he and his lawyers have been spending 10-plus hours a day going through all of this. And then when the president said that and when the National Enquirer ran that thing on its cover, it doesn't engender a good feeling.
Let me just, so Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's longtime lawyer and fixer, has his homes and his offices raided. I understand from your reporting that they weren't just his cell phones that were taken, they were his wife's cell phones, his kids' cell phones. I imagine they were mad about that. So he's dealing with things that a human being deals with when a boulder rolls through their life. He sees Donald Trump go on Fox and Friends and say, teeny, weeny, itty-bitty little bit of work for me, not really my lawyer. I mean, was he pissed?
Well, from my reporting, this is what happened. So he wasn't watching live. I think he was watching this network. Michael Avenatti was on Morning Joe, and I believe that that's what he was watching. And
well, we're glad that he's a viewer. We're happy to have you, Mr. Cohen.
And then the fire alarm in the Regency Hotel where he's been staying tested its system as he came to the interview on Fox and Friends late, which I just think is a perfect metaphor. And his initial reaction, I believe, was shocked. He was stunned. He was due in court at noon that day, and not only was this probably personally wounding, but this was wounding to his legal strategy, and because he had been spending so much time with his lawyers going over this, it was just a moment of total befuddlement for him.
So we started the show, Jonathan Capehart, reporting on the president's White House lawyer trying to replace himself with Emmett Flood. The New York Times breaking the story today that he's going into the White House to take the lead on the Russia investigation. And we learned from two sources that he may ultimately replace Don McGahn. I mean, the president goes through lawyers faster than he goes through wives.
What am I supposed to do with that?
But I mean, he cannot keep, no one wants to stay on the job representing him legally.
Well, no one wants to stay on the job, and he doesn't want them to stay on the job. He loves them the moment he likes the idea, the moment they walk through the door, and then within about a week or two is when we start hearing the leaks about how, oh, the president doesn't like this person anymore, and the president said something.
Bad job on TV.
Right, you don't look good, you're not sounding good. There is chaos in the building that's sitting there behind you. There's chaos in the White House, and there's always been chaos in the White House. And at the top of your show, you laid out through your reporting what McGahn, if I remember your reporting right, what McGahn is hoping will be accomplished through all of these things. But once the president hears that, he's just going to be like a real housewife and like upend the table just for the shock of it.
Well, and I mean, there's some truth to that. I mean, when the president first saw your paper reporter that Emmett Flood was at the Oval Office meeting with him, I'd heard at the time that literally you could get anyone in the Oval Office for a meeting with the president by saying this guy's interested in defending you on TV, and he had 30 minutes of your time. But the president made a big display of going out and saying, no, I love my lawyers. So, I mean, what Jonathan's saying is true. I mean, the addiction is to the upheaval.
Well, I don't know if it's that exactly. You know, he enjoys change, but more than that, I think he blames other people for where he's at. He never actually holds responsibility for himself, for his tweets, for the problems he creates for himself. And instead, he goes after his staff, his lawyers, his people. He throws them out. And the truth is, this is all a quandary of his own making. It all stems from the president's own decisions, his actions, and strangely enough, his tweets. It is still shocking to me after this year and a half. It is still shocking to me how much trouble he gets in on substantive grounds for things he says on Twitter. And it's very possible to me that if we look back, we'll say that Twitter gave rise to Donald Trump and Twitter bought down Donald Trump.
Well, let me press you on that, because the tweet that Jonathan referenced about from this morning's Twitter tantrum, I think we could put it back up. I mean, if you look at the questions that your colleague Mike Schmidt published this week, what did you know? What did you mean by this? I mean, I could see added to the list, what did you mean when you tweeted, at some point I will have no choice but to use the powers granted to the presidency and get involved? I mean, if Bob Mueller wants to know what you, Mr. President, meant when you said, I'd like you to see to it to let Mr. Flynn go, I would imagine that the same thread would want to be understood about what he meant about getting more involved.
It's the quiet part loud presidency, right? He says the thing that you never say out loud. And he said it months and months ago to Lester Holt. I fired him because of the Russia investigation. I mean, what's strange in a sense is that all we need to know about this, we already know. Right. Yeah, he did all this because he didn't want the heat from the Russian investigation. And then he bragged to the Russians that the heat was off. It's all kind of plain as day, and a strange way the investigation has to catch up to the facts that were already on the ground when it started.
And I guess, Jonathan, we don't know that it hasn't. I mean, I constantly get admonished by former intelligence community figures, former law enforcement figures who say it is not an iceberg. You don't know how much of it is above ground. It is an underground civilization. You don't know what you don't know. Bob Mueller's investigation is made up of men and women who occupy 2 floors of a federal building in Washington, D.C. You don't know what they already know. So we don't know exactly where the investigation is. But if they want to know questions about the president's state of mind, about his intent, if we have, I think there's 6 sources today that told us that no one around the president wants him to answer any of those obstruction of justice questions reported by your colleagues this week. We already, as you said, it's already abundantly clear to at least some of the president's lawyers that he's likely obstructed justice.
Well, I think that, first of all, you're right about the Mueller probe. That list of questions, that's not the extent of it, we don't believe. There's certainly going to be other things that the Mueller team is investigating that none of us at this table know about. Also, there are a number of times that White House officials and the number of times that Trump's legal team themselves has tried to get him to stop tweeting. Like, look, we're not asking you to give up Twitter entirely.
Left?
I know, we're not asking you to give up Twitter entirely, but can you at the very least not tweet about the probe, not tweet about Mueller, not tweet about Rosenstein? And for a while, he did listen. As sort of scattershot and undisciplined he was on Twitter about every other subject, he rarely went after those men, particularly by name. That's changed. That's changed in the last 3 months.
It changed in March.
Yes.
It changed around the same time.
And it's a great indication of the pressure that the president and that building now feels about this probe, one that's only grown since the Cohen raid a few weeks ago.
Well, here's the thing, to your iceberg analogy, I wonder if Mueller knows everything. I've gotten to the point where he's omniscient. He knows everything. And whether the president talks to him or not, if the president goes in and talks to him, at this point, it might be a courtesy, because Mueller might have the evidentiary proof of what the president has done. And so that's what I'm looking forward to. All these machinations that are happening right now are really fascinating, but I cannot wait to actually find out what Mueller knows. And I hope he is able to produce some kind of report or issue something so that we all can read it and absorb it.
I don't want to bust your bubble, but someone who worked with him very closely for the 13 years that he served as FBI director said he wouldn't tell his dying mother what he planned to do. So I don't think we'll know what Mueller's going to do until he does it.
Right, until he does it.
All right, up next, Donald Trump's longtime doctor admits what should have been obvious from the start.